Hi there, this is the Guitar Speak podcast, produced here in Sydney, Australia. My name is Matt Wakeling, and thank you so much for joining me for episode number 62. And today we speak to Brian Wampler of Wampler Pedals. Now, as I record this, I am coming off the high. That was from the Sydney Guitar Festival. I had a great weekend getting to a couple of the gigs and being involved in one of the events as well. And I'll talk a bit more about this in the next episode of Australian Guitar News. But I just wanted to put out a congratulations to Adrian Layton and all the team at Century Venues for putting on a fantastic festival. Bring on 2018, I say. All right, another shout out of a different kind. My friend Greg Mara from the West Coast of America. You may know him as one of the guests on our show if you've been listening for a little while. He has a fantastic podcast called the Iconoclast Music Podcast. Very guitar centric, but delves into other things like producing and other stuff. And Greg's an amazing guitar player, and his show rocks. He was very kind to mention this podcast on a recent interview with Michael Melender of Guitar Player magazine, which was cool. And I need to return the favour because I'm talking to Brian Wampler today, who Greg works with regularly. He's often in the Wampler booth at the NAMM conventions and uses Wampler pedals in his rig. So when the opportunity came up for me to speak with Brian, I definitely checked out Greg's interview, which was excellent. So if you've not checked out the Iconoclast Music Podcast, do so. It's on iTunes and all the regular places. All right, so on to my conversation with Brian Wampler. It was pretty exciting to meet Brian and find out about his career and get the lowdown on even some of his most recent releases like the Dr. Lo-Fi Delay. It was cool to hear the backstory on that and a bunch of other stuff. All right, let's just dive straight in. All right, Brian Wampler, welcome to the Guitar Speak podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, I really appreciate your time. Now, Brian, before you started building pedals, you were a guitar player. What led you to playing guitar in the first place?
Well, I was 7 or 8, and my brother played drums, my older brother. And keep in mind, this was back in the 80s. So his band was over, and they were playing like a Night Ranger song, which is big here in the 80s.
Yeah.
And so, I looked up to my older brother, and I thought that was cool. But the guitar player had this flying V. And I don't know why. I hadn't really been exposed to it that much, but just, I don't know, hearing him play guitar, seeing the flying V, and playing a song that I was familiar with, the whole thing just seemed really cool to me. So,
awesome.
I wanted, it just made me want to play guitar. And so I asked my parents for a guitar for Christmas, and they bought me a little cheap acoustic with the action is about 3 inches off the neck.
Yeah.
So I couldn't do any chords on it or anything.
Couldn't do the Night Ranger.
Yeah, but about the next I don't know, it's next birthday or something, they bought me an electric guitar, a cheaper electric guitar, and started just learning things by ear from there.
Okay.
Because of course this is way before the internet, and I don't even think there's much in the ways of tablature at that time, at least available to me.
Yeah, not really, no.
Yeah, so I was I'd record something off the radio and on a tape cassette.
Yes.
And rewind play all day long, trying to figure out those bar chords.
I think we're the same vintage, Brian. This is a very familiar story. That's awesome. Cool. What kind of stuff were you into beyond the Night Ranger?
I had 2 older brothers. My other one was really into like Van Halen, which kind of that's really what got me turned on to Van Halen.
Ah, cool.
So I was really like all the classic rock stuff. AC/DC, I love a lot of AC/DC.
Yeah.
Older Def Leppard. Back when they were a rock band.
Yes.
Really just like all the greats. Everything. There's a few bands I wasn't real crazy about. I was okay with some of the older Ozzy, but it didn't really resonate with me. Metallica, I loved Metallica.
Yeah.
Especially old Metallica.
Cool.
Like Garage Day stuff and Ride the Lightning and Kill 'Em All. I loved all that stuff.
Yeah.
But and especially Dokken, George. I was George a gigantic fan of George Lynch. Yeah, which, it kind of came full circle. He called me, I don't know, it's been a year or two ago, and was asking about pedal stuff. And I'm like, holy crap, I'm talking to like George Lynch. And I don't usually get starstruck, but there's a few people that, I'll talk to on the phone and I get pretty starstruck. I'm just like, I can't believe I'm having a conversation with this guy. He's asking me questions.
That is so good. That's so good. Okay, who else? Who else would get you a bit starstruck? So, George Lynch?
George Lynch did it for Brent. Believe it or not, Brent Mason was a huge influence on me.
Yeah.
So that was, that was really cool getting to work with him. Brad Paisley, I'm still a big fan of his, and even still to this day, sometimes I talk to him like, geez, it's kind of surreal, in a way that, of course they're just real people like you and I, but it's still kind of surreal, like talking to your guitar hero about something,
Yeah.
But yeah, that's, I think George Lynch is probably the biggest one. Steve Vai was a really cool guy to talk to.
Yeah, wow.
And to kind of get to know a little bit. That's probably the biggest ones that stick out in my mind right now.
Yeah, awesome. Very cool. I've seen you in interviews and heard your podcast. You always seem super chilled, but
I'm pretty laid back, yeah.
Yeah. But it's kind of cool to know that, you still dig meeting your heroes. That's awesome.
Yeah.
When you're so when you're on the electric, learning all this rock stuff, do you remember your first pedal?
I do. It was, I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was an Electro-Harmonix.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say Muff Fuzz, but it was the kind that you insert into the input of your guitar. The on and off switch was a toggle.
Okay, cool.
And yeah, that was my very first one.
Nice.
From then on, I didn't have really good gear growing up at all. Like I had a little 5-watt Kingston solid state amp from like Sears or something like that.
Yeah, sure.
So I was always like trying to, I would have a friend that had a pedal and I would borrow one off of him, trying to, make whatever little $75 amp I had sound decent. I went through the Gorilla amp stage, of course.
Oh yeah, yep, that was awesome.
Yeah,
with a little what was it called, tube stack or something? That switch.
Yeah. I had a Crate G40, which was my first quote unquote good amp.
Yep.
As a teenager, and I did a lot of really weird things with that too. So I always wanted like that. At the time I would call it like a Dokken sound, because that was some of the stuff that George was doing was like the pinnacle to me of great guitar tone.
Uh-huh.
And so I would take the amp and I would run, I think, a send out to the input of a bass amp. So I'd run a bass amp along with that guitar amp to give it more, almost like a 412 type of thing.
Yeah, a bit more oomph.
Yeah, and and I never really could find any pedals that would give me the sound that I wanted. Just really throughout the years. But a lot of that was just because there wasn't a lot of information. I didn't really even know or understand. Well, I definitely didn't know what a plexi was. Mm-hmm. I knew what a Marshall was, but I didn't quite understand that sound is a product of a cranked Marshall with some really good mics in a controlled setting and a really good engineer.
Yes.
So as I got older and got like the Marshalls and stuff, I would be like, it sounds great, but it's not exactly like, Scorpions Rock You Like a Hurricane sound or something,
Sure.
And there's a lot of learning involved, and especially, once the internet did become available to me, that's the type of stuff that I was just completely religious about, like trying to figure out. Mm-hmm. I was poking through all the different forums, just talking about gear and looking up tablature and that sort of thing. So really, that's kind of where I guess if any knowledge came about, that's where it came about. I didn't go to any sort of college to be an engineer or anything like that. I really just knew what I wanted in my head and tried to figure out a way to get there from point A to B.
Okay. So were you messing around with the electronics before, say, pre-internet, before you could access this information?
Not really. Definitely not guitar gear.
Okay.
With me, it was. I always took stuff apart and very rarely could get it back together. I was kind of that kid. I would just take it apart to see what it looked like, but I didn't really know what it did. And I didn't really have an interest in it. Not until I found out that people were modifying pedals. And then I'm like, whoa, you can like modify these pedals to make them sound different. And so yeah, I just started pulling parts out and putting new parts in and seeing what happened. And then I started reading about how electronics work and why a capacitor does what it does, and et cetera. But you know, the very first thing I did was just pulling out parts and putting different parts in there and seeing what would happen.
Okay, cool. This led to obviously what you're doing now, but when did you write your book, How to Modify Guitar Pedals? That's become a bit of a a revered reference for pedal modders.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird cult classic, I guess, in a niche.
Yeah.
But, it started out just like a Microsoft Word document for me to remember what I was doing.
Okay.
You know, to know on this pedal, here's what I changed. And then on like different DIY forums, people would ask about modifications, and so I'd post a modification. Or maybe I posted a sound clip and someone asked what I did, and so I was explaining why I changed these parts.
Okay.
But I was getting so many like email and stuff was building up, and just a lot of my time was being consumed with answering questions about it, which is totally fine, but it was like taking over my life. And so I talked to a friend of mine and who has his own internet business now, but at that time he was getting his business started on eBay. And he's like, dude, you need to make like some sort of ebook and at least charge a couple bucks to make it worth your time. Because like you're taking off family time and work time to do this stuff.
Yeah, sure.
So you need to be paid for it. And so that's what I did. It started out as an ebook, and I just kept adding things to it. And people actually told me they wanted a hard copy. I had no plans at all of actually writing any books or doing anything like that. So I found a print-on-demand service that I could, run it through them, and they would print the book out, and I would sell it that way. And so that's really how it happened. It started as an ebook, and just due to customer demand, ended up as a regular book.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Now, there were some pedals that came out under the name Indie Guitarist. How did that tie into what you were doing at the time?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I needed a website and I needed a name. I didn't know what to call it, and so my username on a DIY forum was Indie Guitarist, and so I thought, well, I'll see if that site's taken, and it wasn't. So that's literally what I called it. There really was no rhyme or reason behind it other than I needed a name, a short name, rather than Brian does DIY mods and stuff like that.com. That's way too long.
Sure.
So I started out doing that, and just the evolution of business. People were asking me to build them more pedals. I had retailers asking me if they could buy pedals off me. Mm-hmm. So I started saying, okay, my business model is changing. I either got to stick with DIY stuff or I got to morph over and do pedals because I can't do both. I just don't have enough time. At this point, I was barely sleeping anyways, a couple hours a night at most.
Okay, wow.
And I was really busy. And so I ended up just doing the pedal line. And I thought, it's actually kind of a nod to Robert Keelan. I like how he branded everything as his name because not from an egotistical perspective, but just as a branding thing. Mm-hmm. So, you see Robert, you know who he is.
Yeah.
You can identify with him. I'm like, I need to do that rather than like indie guitarist. So I just started changing the names on the pedals to Wampler pedals rather than indie guitarist. So and still like sometimes on eBay I'll see like an old pedal that says indie guitarist or something.
Okay,
and
cool.
It's fun to see those things, and I usually try to buy them when I can.
Put them in the museum.
I didn't keep anything of my own. Okay. That's kind of it. Really kind of sucks because there's a lot of times where I'm like, I recall building a particular pedal, or a couple of them. But I have no reference or no idea of what it sounded like now, 15 years later.
Yeah, sure.
And so I'm like, it's kind of nostalgic to me where I want to get that pedal back and see what it sounded like.
That's great.
Nothing like having gas for your own pedals. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, so in all your search engines, you've got these indie guitarist searches going on.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Are there any crazy prices? Have these become sort of cold classic pedals?
So I don't really follow pricing that much. I mean, every now and then I'll see someone trying to sell one for some stupid crazy price, and I generally just shake my head. I mean, I'm not gonna pay $500 for one of my old pedals. I wouldn't expect anyone else to either.
Sure.
But I mean, I can understand, like, if you're a guy that just collects pedals and you think it's an investment of some sort, okay. But, I mean, if I see one for a good price, I'll snag it. But if not, then I'll just wait till the market changes and I'll buy it down the road.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I imagine it was a big jump to go from indie guitars to Wampler pedals, though, in terms of setting up shop and marketing yourself as your own company. Was that a big learning curve?
Bit. I mean, yeah. Well, yes and no. I mean, my methods of marketing at that time were, basically I had a email newsletter list, and of course I had the website, and I was on a lot of forums. So I was still on those same forums, and a lot of people knew who I was. Well, at least in the forums, they knew who I was.
Okay. Yeah.
And my email list knew that it was me emailing them.
Yeah.
So it really wasn't that big of a deal, other than like paperwork, So I got incorporated as Wampler Pedals.
Yeah.
And other than that, I mean, there was a little bit of market confusion, but not as much as you might think. But we were still pretty small back then. I mean, I might be at that time. I don't even remember numbers, but it wasn't much. I mean, it was under 50 pedals a month.
Okay. Yeah.
So, yeah, it wasn't too awful crazy in the marketplace, and it was a different market back then, a completely different market. Where now, I mean, I don't even know how many pedal companies are here.
Oh, that's crazy,
Trying to exist or trying to get started. I mean,
Sure.
shoot, this morning I had 2 or 3 people email me asking questions because they wanted to start a pedal business.
Okay.
And and that's a common thing. Like every day I get emails from someone asking me, where should I buy this from? Or how should I do this? Or how do I get people to notice my pedals? So, I mean, there's all the time more and more people jumping into it, and the market's shrinking. So it's so I would say this: if you have any of your audience is interested in getting pedals, it's a great hobby. It's really hard to make a living at this point in time, for sure.
Sure. It seems like your timing was perfect in terms of the rise of the quote unquote boutique pedal market.
Right place at the right time.
Yeah, and the internet forums and all those kind of places where people were getting into this.
Yeah, I mean, it seems there's a bit of luck to it for sure, but the other side of it that a lot of people didn't see was that I was spending tremendous amounts of hours on all these forums and all these places talking to people in order for them to basically like me and believe in me. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's as far as marketing goes, it's kind of like Facebook marketing now, where you're talking to people and you're creating content in order for people to notice you. And I was just doing the same thing. It was just it was before YouTube, and before, is the MySpace era.
Yeah, I remember that.
So it was before anyone was even using Facebook. And like I said, the audience was, it was just starting to grow. So it wasn't gigantic like it is now. I mean, in terms of, like on Facebook, I don't even know how many gear groups there are. At the time, there was just a handful of popular forums, though. Mm-hmm. So, and that's kind of where everybody kind of stuck together. So it wasn't nearly as hard as it would be today to rebrand.
Sure.
Or start. So.
Mm-hmm. So I should say this is around 2006 when you started Wampler as an entity.
Yeah, it's a bit fuzzy at that point. I mean, it was 5, 6, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, there was a point in time when I had indie guitarist and Wampler, and the same thing on both pages.
Okay.
Just because some people were going to indie guitarists and some people were going to Wampler pedals, and I didn't want to miss any of that traffic, so I kind of had both sites. But the email would both funnel to me. So whichever one you emailed me from, I would still get the email. But it was kind of awkward and probably not the best method of doing it. But we're through that phase now, so all's well.
Okay. I've heard you say that you are more engineer than builder. Can you talk about that a little?
Well, I mean, I started out building all my own stuff, And as you get older, you kind of figure out your strengths. So yeah, at the time when I was starting all this stuff in 2000, 2001 or whatever it was, I never really put a whole lot of thought into, whether I was even able to build 1,000 pedals a month, or let alone 5,000 pedals a month or whatever. I just knew I was building one here and one there, and doing this modification for this person, and putting out a lot of content in all these places. So as things were getting bigger, and more and more orders were coming in, I started realizing that building 20 of the same pedal sucks. At least for my personality. Like it ended up being a lot like factory work.
Okay, sure.
And I was a terrible factory worker. My personality is I obviously can hear me talk, so I'm scattered anyways. But as far as like work habits, I'm scattered there too. Like it's very hard for me to just do one thing all day long. It's incredibly boring to me. Mm-hmm. So I started out, I hired some people to build for me, and that worked out better. And then I don't even know the years, maybe 2009 or 10 or so, hired an outside manufacturer in Kentucky to build everything for me.
Okay.
So, and that allowed me to really focus on what I was good at, which was designing stuff and talking to people. That's my two favorite things to do, is talk to our actual customers who are using the product and design new fun things, new toys to play with.
You're known for taking extended amounts of time to really dig into a design, which I assume takes up a lot of your time as well.
Yeah, it does. And there's a bit of a perfectionist part in there that I struggle with, where I'm sure being a musician, you write a song and you're recording it and you're like, it's almost there, but it's just not perfect. And you fiddle and fiddle and fiddle and fiddle. And 3 weeks later, you're like, it's even worse than it was. So, I think over the years, I've gotten better at saying, okay, it's 99.999% perfect. It's good enough.
Okay.
There's got to be a point where it's good enough, because at least with my personality, there is no such thing as perfection, even though I strive for it.
Okay. Well, what's an example of a pedal in your range that took you a long time to nail down the way you wanted?
The biggest one is it started out being called the Ace 30, and then ended up being called the 30-something.
Okay.
Due to some legal problems with Vox. So, but that one, I had built, like maybe at least 5 or 6 prototypes, different types of circuits where I was trying to achieve that sound. But here's the weird thing. Like anytime you're working with a breadboard, and to kind of back up here, a breadboard is something that you build circuits on very quickly without soldering, just by kind of poking wires in places and connecting them without soldering. So you can like try designs real quickly. But anytime you're going from a breadboard to like a finished product with a circuit board, and it's all in one place and the layout's done, things change, sounds change. So sometimes what sounded great on a breadboard sounds it can go either way. Sometimes it sounds better once it's in a pedal. Sometimes it sounds worse, or just completely different.
Why would that be? Why is that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that play into it. With a breadboard, I'm looking at mine right now. So there's 50 different wires that are a foot long, just going every which direction.
Okay.
So what you have is a bunch of little antennas there, and also in how they're arranged, it kind of creates capacitance, and it changes. Let me think of a good way to put this. It changes the sound overall based on how a circuit is laid out. Okay. So with a breadboard with all these wires running everywhere, it really changes the sound. We're not talking like, you think you're going to have a tube screamer and it ends up being a fuzz. It's nothing like that. It's maybe like with these Vox type pedals I was trying to come up with.
Yeah.
It just wasn't nailing it. Like it was close. It was 80 or 90% there, but it just wasn't close enough for me to say, let's ship it, and so I just a strive for perfection. I just, kept trying and trying and trying and trying. I think what I really wanted to achieve, I think we did it. And that's I really wanted a pedal that would give me like that chimey, clean tone, no matter what amp I was playing on. So if I'm playing like a Classic 50, PV Classic 50 or something like that, I can kick this pedal on and it gets really bell-like chimey tones.
Uh-huh.
And so that was the main thing I was going for with that, and that's it just took a lot of trial and error.
That must be good to know, that all that work has paid off, and it must be a product you're very proud of.
It is. But I mean, another weird thing about me is, especially after I spend so much time doing something like that, I get burned out on it.
Sure, that's understandable.
So, it's because there's a lot that goes into like the prototyping. Like you're playing in all these different situations, and you're trying to break it. You're trying to make it sound bad with one of many different amps, So, at the time, I was taking it to a bunch of different music stores to try to find all different types of amps to play it on, or pedals at that time before I had 40 amps, and so yeah, it's hard to make things sound right, I don't know. I'm probably not explaining it well.
Oh, I think I get the idea though. Yeah, you've got something in your head, and you're just trying to translate that via the circuit and reach that space.
And just if it's not 99.9% close, I'm not interested in putting it out.
Sure.
I'm not a fan of just putting out something because you need something.
Yeah.
Like it just. It's too much. It's too much like an art. I think I look at it a lot like an art form.
Uh-huh.
Even though it is something that's based completely on like math and physics and stuff, I don't look at it that way. I look at it much more like painting a picture. And if the picture doesn't look right, then I don't want others to see it.
Yeah. Well, that's cool, man. I mean, I think it's no surprise then that you've done so well, and that Wampler pedals are such a staple in so many pedal boards.
Thank you.
At Summer NAMM this year, you released the Doctor Delay, which looks great, looks really cool.
Well, thank you.
Could we take that as an example of a product that has just come out, and could you explain the process for that release backwards, perhaps? So we see it at Summer NAMM. I see it on my Instagram, and I think it looks fantastic. A lo-fi delay with some really cool features.
Yeah, I mean it's that one. That one actually is quite a bit different story than like the Ethereal, where like the Ethereal is kind of more what you're talking about, where it took a long period of time and there's a lot of arduous steps to get there. The Doctor actually started out being called the Wheelhouse, which was made for Brad Paisley for his album called The Wheelhouse. We only built like four. How did we build? We built under 10. I think each guy in the band had like one or two each that they would take out on tour. And it was just to achieve a delay sound he wanted on that album. But it was such a fun delay. I'm like, I really hate for this thing to just sit on a shelf. I think we should at least release it in some sort of capacity. And if people dig it, we'll keep making it. And if they don't, then we'll discontinue it. But it was a finished design. It's fun to play, and it's just that was a really weird situation that doesn't happen very often.
Okay.
There's not a lot of pedals where I make for an artist for an album.
Right.
But it was just because I was like I said, I was a gigantic Brad Paisley geek. So I'm like, yes, Mr. Paisley, I'd be glad to do that.
Win-win. It's worked out well. You got a new pedal on the line. Hey,
yeah.
You've got a great story about how you met Brad Paisley. Can you tell us that?
Yes. So I'm going to say this is around 2001 or two, somewhere in that area. He was a smaller artist. He was still popular here in America, but he wasn't selling out 40,000 seat arenas at that time.
Yeah.
So he was in a smaller place here in Indiana. It's about 2,000 or 3,000 seating, or it was. It burnt down, but it was about 2,000 or 3,000 seats. And during the middle of the show, he would allow people to like walk up to the stage and take a picture of him.
Okay.
So there was like this whole line of people waiting to take a picture, right? And so I thought, I'm going to do something different. So I modified a Boss OD3 overdrive. And I thought, I knew what Gary's using and stuff. So I thought I did a modification I thought he might like.
Okay.
And walked up to the just got in line, walked up to the stage and tossed it on stage right in front of him. And so, and of course that was weird to him. He looked down at it, looked at me, and kind of like, why did this guy throw a pedal on stage? Looked over at his tech and kind of nodded over him to come and get it out of the way. But and that was just, it's kind of like, when I was growing up, there was a lot of talk about people who were trying to get their music to an artist or to a producer or something, to get that elusive record deal.
Yes, yeah.
And they would sneak a tape in their car and stuff like that. And I guess it was kind of a play on that, where, I thought it might be kind of funny, but it might get his attention, and maybe I might be able to work with him one day.
Wow.
So it worked.
That is the best. That is so. I wonder if that happens at all these gigs now. If you've got these up and coming pedal builders that are dumping stuff on his stage.
I'll know if he next time I see him, if he's like, dude, you got to quit talking about that story. People keep hitting me with pedals.
Oh, it's like the Tom Jones underpants. That's crazy.
Oh, yes, exactly. Bit more toneful.
So good. Anyone who's a pedal guy, anyone who plays pedals, myself included, the amp is incredibly important. And, we talk about pedal platform amps, or, I talk about an amp that likes pedals. And for me, I'm just thinking it's got a lot of clean headroom, so the amp's not going to colour the tone. But obviously, whatever you do, the amp's going to have its own vibe. So you've you haven't, not just, but you've released the Bravado amplifier.
Yes.
Talk about your mindset in creating something with pedals in mind.
Well, I mean, being the type of guy that likes to just fiddle with stuff, I for several years back into the DIY days, I was messing with amps and modifying them, and just for fun mainly. I mean, I did release a couple ebooks that would explain how to modify some cheaper popular amps to make them sound different. But, I never really thought about actually jumping into the amp game full throttle. And over the past couple of years, I mean, I've got a lot of amps, and I like the sound of all of them.
Yeah.
But it seems like every amp has like its certain types of pedals that it loves. Like a Marshall will eat a fuzz face all day long.
Yes.
Loves the fuzz into a Marshall.
Yeah.
But you might put. I'm trying to think of a good example with a Marshall. I don't know. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a particular example. But you might put a certain type of overdrive or distortion. Maybe it's like a Noble's ODR1. Maybe it's a little too bass heavy or something.
Sure.
And it gets a little flubby, and it's not as tight, and it just doesn't sound right with it.
Yeah.
Or
that same fuzz into a Fender is.
Yeah. So that same fuzz into a Fender, you're like, holy crap, that's really bright and really bad sounding.
Yeah.
And the same thing with like Vox style amps. I love the sound of a Vox.
Yeah.
But some distortions sound great with it. Some distortions sound just very nasally and shrilly, and sounds like nails down a chalkboard.
Because there's already that very particular upper mid thing with the Vox, isn't there? That not every pedal's going to get along with.
Right, and there's this certain high frequency content that makes it sound really bell-like and really chimey, that makes some pedals sound shrill, sound like the high end is kind of raspy. And so what I wanted was an amp that would, no matter what you put in front of it, like if you're using a metal zone or whatever, it's actually going to sound pretty decent, And so I want it to be fairly neutral, but not flat. So a lot of people don't understand what I mean. It still has its own flavor. Okay. So it's not like completely flat, transparent, like plugging into a console. It's not like that at all. But it's very even in the mids, where like you talked about the Vox, the high end spike. We talked, the Blackface has kind of a scoop in the mids, very bass heavy, and a very bright top end. So I wanted to kind of even all that out.
Yeah.
But I still wanted a person to be able to get that stuff. So for example, you can turn the mids all the way down, and it's a bit more like a Fender when you have the bright setting on maybe 3 or 4. Now bring the mids back up, and then you can turn the bright setting to about 4 or 5. Maybe hit the fat switch on, and now you're kind of doing a little bit closer to what a Vox does, but it's not quite so spiky.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So
Yeah,
so
cool.
you can kind of get flavors of different amps,
Yeah.
but that especially that bright switch, what it's doing in the circuit, really allows it to work with a lot of pedals. And that's controlling a certain part of the circuit that on all these different amps, it's not completely responsible for what creates the interaction problems, but it does play a huge role in that.
Mm-hmm.
So we just kind of corrected all that stuff to make it work great with pedals. And not, like you can crank it up and get a pretty good dirt tone too. I probably should do a video of that. But it is it's fairly high headroom. So it's 40 watts technically, 2 6L6s. That doesn't mean though that it's incredibly loud. A lot of people associate like wattage with loudness, and it's actually a function of a bunch of different things, like how much signal's coming through, what kind of speaker you're using, like all this stuff. So it's not like a super loud. It's not going to sound like a twin. Where you can't be in the next room with it.
Yes.
But it's a lot of high headroom. We're in the stages of an amp that it would normally clip a lot, like around the phase inverter stage. I've killed some signal in there, so it's not going to distort as much. You can give it quite a bit of volume and get that nice compression without a ton of overdrive.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. I really like the switchable bright switch. A lot of amps will have a bright switch at a fixed.
Yeah, and it's like I always wanted something in the middle, And like I was just talking about a twin. Like a twin, you have off, which is dull, and then on, which is like super bright. and the EQs. Some people don't understand this. The EQs on the amp, that treble control, you're not controlling those same frequencies. It's totally different.
It's a different.
Yeah, and you're controlling a bunch of other stuff with it, like mid-range and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So, like that 5-position bright switch just changes specific frequencies and how that amp is going to react to those frequencies, if that makes sense, in a way that's completely different than a treble control.
Yeah, cool.
Hard to explain over a microphone, much easier to play one.
Yeah,
absolutely. Oh, I
absolutely.
get it now.
I think you nail it with the Fender analogy though. On any amp, the bright switch, it's either going to work for you or it's not. But with yours, at least you've got some wriggle room depending on
right.
Yeah, how it's working out. That's cool. Nice. So Brian, what's happening for the second half of 2017?
Well, there's a bunch of things. I've got. I know I at least got 3 or 4 more pedals that are ready to come out, or dangerously close to being ready to come out.
Fantastic.
I don't want to release everything at the same time. I like kind of spreading them out a little bit. I also have another amp that'll be coming out. I don't know if that'll be Q4. It might be Q1 of next year.
Okay.
But there's several different things that will be rolling out every month and a half to 2 months, maybe 3 months. Yeah, probably 2 months or so.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, I can't be specific yet. I like to kind of keep that stuff in the bag until we get a little closer to time. But yeah, there's some really fun and cool things coming up.
Great. Yeah, I like it how you called the Doctor the mystery pedal leading up to Summer NAMM, and we just had to keep checking in until it was released.
Well, it just makes things funner, rather than saying, like we did with the Ethereal, where I released it. Well, I announced it way too early, and it wasn't ready for like a year later.
Okay.
And so that it kind of deflates the excitement out of it sometimes,
And does everyone bug you? When's this reverb delay coming out?
Oh my gosh, yeah. But again, it was another one of those perfectionist things where there was some noise in the circuit. It wasn't incredible. It wasn't like a huge amount of noise. It was just enough where I'm like, I can make this better. Like, there's a way to fix this noise. And so we basically broke apart the entire circuit bit by bit to figure out where the noise was actually coming from, laid the whole thing out again, fixed all the noise, and now we're good.
Yeah, awesome. Very cool. Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time today. It's been so exciting to hear more of your story. Really,
my pleasure.
Great.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun.
All right, I had a lot of fun too. That was great meeting Brian Wampler and finding out more about his story. Hey, if you're enjoying these podcasts, why not share them on your social media? It really helps us get the word out and is greatly appreciated. Also, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or iHeartRadio or pretty much most podcatching apps or whatever, and you just get our episodes sent to you every single week, which is a cool way to keep up to date. Because you know what, this Thursday, I can't tell you who I'm interviewing, but please ask me after Thursday, because it's just blowing my mind right now. So if you subscribe, you'll keep up to date with all that. All right, thank you so much for joining me. My name's Matt Wakeling. You've been listening to the Guitar Speak podcast. I'll see you next time. Bye now.